Thank you very much, Senator Heitkamp. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, it's interesting listening to my colleague from North Dakota, because the issues that you raise are Chairman and I were just talking, how many hearings on suicide in Indian country have we had before this committee? And again, we're not seeing the statistics really get much better. The one thing that I've noted is that we just kind of changing the deck chairs here. It used to be that Alaska was #1. Now it's Montana and Wyoming that are tied for #1. New Mexico tied for #3, and Alaska has dropped to #4. But we haven't really solved the problems. We are still continuing the discussions, and in the meantime, we're losing our children. And in addition, to follow up your line of inquiry about the mental trauma and some of the research that we're seeing, look at our increasing levels of suicide amongst our military, amongst our veterans, those who have experienced some level of trauma. So again, I'm with you. I'm not the doctor here, but it does lead you to conclude that maybe we need to be looking at some other areas. And I would certainly be interested in working with my friend on this. I look at where we seem to be having some limited success in my state. It was about 4 years ago now, we had a town hall on suicide in Bethel, and brought out as many people who were willing to talk about suicide right after a horrible rash of suicide out in some of the villages up north. And in fairness, it was much of the same conversation that we hear around here until we came to the very end, where some of the children, the students that I had invited from some of the villages that had been impacted, rose to speak. And it was painful listening to them, because they stood in the center in front of all these grown-ups and elders and couldn't speak. But they were so brave that they would not let themselves sit down. They stood for a minute in silence, gathering the courage to speak about what had happened in their village. And one young woman made the comment that, yes, suicide was kind of a normal teenage thing. And it ripped your heart. And it was, I think, from that roundtable that we've seen within the YKHC, they identified 4 different villages, Hooper Bay, Chivx, Gammon, and Alakanek, who have had exceptionally high rates of suicide. They began to focus very specifically on these communities. And in their message to me, since they've been doing that, they have experienced no suicides to this point in time. So what are they doing? It's the culturally based programs. It's gatherings, potlatches, arts and crafts activities, making fish traps, the talking circles. Some of the other things that we look to, there's a gentleman from Tanana, Vernon Stickman Sr., who lost a daughter to suicide in 2010. And he walks the Yukon River during the wintertime, 140 miles from community to community, to raise awareness. Is that helping? I don't know. Is he as one person who doesn't have a program, who doesn't have a budget, just saying, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get some attention to this, to shine some kind of a spotlight, to deal with my own personal grief, I think, as a dad. But I look to where we can be making a difference. And I just met with some of our leaders in suicide education and prevention yesterday. And they say, I said, James, what's the one thing that we could do that would make a difference? It's the mental health professionals. But it seems to me so much that, particularly with youth suicide, it has to be the kids that are there for one another, that are saying, I'm there for you. And so as we talk about these programs, I hope that we're not just talking as adults in a room, talking about funding and budgets and what the MSPI program is doing to make progress. I really hope that it It is designed to involve the young people for their ideas. Because I think it was not until those young people spoke up in Bethel that we really started to talk about it. It was not until the young people at AFN 2 years ago spoke up from Tanana and called out the parents, the adults, the elders, and said, we are tired of being the victims of neglect, the victims of sexual assault, the victims of violence, the victims of suicide. Wake up, grown-ups. What are you going to do about it? And so anything that we can be doing that is bringing in our young people for the solutions, I think, has got to be key. Mr. McSwain, I want to ask one quick question to you, and this is regarding the MSPI program. We think it's making some progress. We're hearing from some of the groups in our state that it is. I've been a supporter of it. I think it's culturally relevant. I think it's getting us going in the right place. But I've been told on a few occasions that the overall structure and the management currently inhibits the program from being used to its full potential. And I was told by a group in Alaska that some questions that they have submitted to the program virtually went unanswered. I don't know much more beyond that, but I'm wondering whether it's a lack of resources that is complicating effectively running this program, or if you're aware of any other obstacles that we have faced with regards to the MSPI.
I believe that the MSPI program is doing some great things, and I think it's in one of those where it's at the community and the community is directing it. In all of our programs, I mean, whether it's SDPI or MSPI, you know, the mass suicide prevention program, it's when the community has their own design on what they want to do with the resources and they know how to move forward. That's what's making the progress on that program. It's been 6 years since we've had it in place. We're going to be doing a full annual review, full review of the 6 years and see what the successes and where the improvements ought to happen. We're doing that this year. I like your other comment about kids. That struck a tone with me because the one area that we haven't done a real good job about, and we're going to do that, and that is simply having kids get together in all of, you know, having our service units and recommending the tribes that they do it as well. The tribes are really interested when we start talking about the pathways, which is hiring students as a GS 1, 2, or 3, and having them provide support to us. Rather than, and I think there was a comment made by Dr. Fonboy about the schools and the security they feel. Well, you can imagine what I was feeling when I was worried about suicides, and the schools were letting out in the Northern Plains. I mean, what's going to happen to all those kids? Do they have any structure? And so that's a part of it. And that's certainly a conversation we're having with all of the MSPI recipients as to what can they do for kids. And this expansion that we've got proposed for 2016 in Generation Indigenous is about kids. And it's a building on the MSPI. But if you're having questions about, if there's concerns from folks from Alaska, we'll look. You just ask us and we'll look into it.
Happy to do that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski.